We were in the national spotlight once again with the Supreme Court hearing Idaho's emergency abortion case this week. Today on CityCast Boise, we'll discuss which way the justices are leaning and share an update just before the open primaries initiative deadline. Plus, we're diving into the literal dumpster fires happening around Boise. It's Friday, April 26th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Thank you so much for joining me, Frankie. It was another wild week, and Idaho was in the national news again.
Again. And this time specifically at the Supreme Court in D.C., where, we heard a lot about our abortion ban. That was what the questions around emergency treatment and abortion.
Yeah, Idaho goes to the Supreme Court and might change federal law for everyone.
Yeah, this does have big implications potentially, which you had a really great conversation with State's newsroom reporter Kelsey Mosley Morris earlier this week to kind of set up the stakes of this case and what's going on. And just as a reminder for people of how we got here. So when Roe v. Wade fell, the Dobbs decision came down in 2022, Idaho's trigger law, abortion ban, kicked in pretty quickly thereafter. And in August of 2022, the Biden administration sued the state over this question of emergency care and this one particular federal law called EMTALA, which I know you know a lot more about than I do as a nurse. So, Lindsay, remind us what EMTALA is, because I always get confused.
Yeah, no, there's lots of things that are confusing about this case. So EMTALA is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And basically what it means is if you go to the emergency and you are concerned about something with your health or your life, or you're experiencing a medical emergency, they have to see you, they have to treat you regardless of your ability to pay. And let's say, you're in a little country hospital and they don't have the treatment that you need, or the best available treatment, they have to stabilize you and then get you to another facility for further treatment.
So there's like a few different elements to this.
Yes, yes. And it is particularly attuned to pregnancy and pregnancy issues because it came about due to pregnant patients being patient dumped when they didn't have insurance and there were issues with the pregnancy. And so I think it's kind of interesting that is coming down to EMTALA versus the Idaho abortion bans, considering this was a law created to protect pregnant people, protect their pregnancy, and make sure that they would be given the treatment that they need. And now that is becoming an issue in Idaho where, because of our abortion bans, patients' health and fertility, which should be protected under EMTALA, that's one of those, if you're going to have a major organ issue or you're going to have some kind of a major health issue if you're not treated, that federal law says they have to treat you regardless of if you can pay. But under the Idaho abortion ban, we don't have a health exception. We don't have a fertility exception. And so unless you are dying, you cannot get an abortion, even if that's the treatment you need or the stabilizing treatment that you need.
Yeah, even if the doctor in good faith is going, this is what this patient needs, it creates this really scary gray area because, of course, the abortion ban is penalizing and criminalizing doctors in this case. And we know that, just for more background to keep, this is all pertinent to this conversation, is we know that OBGYNs are fleeing Idaho. Like 22% at least have left since the Dobbs decision came down and the trigger ban went into effect. So this is all like really real world stuff that's happening in Idaho, as we've talked about a million times. And of course, also just to note, remember the injunction that the Supreme Court in January, right? There was this injunction in place, which meant that the ban wasn't in place, or that in these emergency cases that doctors could, if they felt it was medically necessary to preserve the health and of the pregnant person, could perform an abortion until January, when the Supreme Court decided, we're going to take up this case, and for now, we're going to lift that. So this has been the law of the land since January.
Yeah. So since January, we haven't had full EMTALA protections for pregnant people in Idaho, which there's been a lot of discussion of that. Does that make pregnant people second-class citizens because they don't have full access to EMTALA. And hospitals have come out and said that they're having to do emergency air transport for patients every other week
my
since
gosh.
January.
Yeah. Is it like, I think I read that St. Luke said that they've airlifted 6 patients to Salt Lake or other places in these cases?
Yeah. And it's already from January to April, 6 times as many patients as they had to airlift in the entirety of 2023.
Right. And 2023 was when this wasn't the case. So, yeah, definitely a stark data there to kind of set this up. So, I don't know. Did you read a lot of the debate? I mean, there's plenty of articles and coverage of this because they debated this on Wednesday, and it was Idaho Deputy Attorney General Josh Turner was representing Idaho, and then I think her name's Elizabeth Proligar. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce her name. She was the Justice Department Solicitor General who was arguing in front of the justices for the Biden administration. Did you read and listen to some of the debate?
Oh, absolutely. I was gobbling up every article I could find, and all the clips, all the audio clips, everything I could find. I thought it was very interesting, not surprising, but Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson were all
the liberal wing of the
yes, the liberal 3 were questioning Josh Turner's reasoning quite a bit and making really, in my opinion, really good arguments about why EMTALA needs to be available. As a nurse, I feel like EMTALA should be available to everyone. But I was really surprised because Justice Amy Coney Barrett is one of the more conservative members of the court. And she specifically called out Josh Turner, saying that he was hedging his answers and providing contrary conclusions to what his arguments were. So I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Did you get a chance to watch any of the coverage?
Yeah, I clued into what Barrett was saying for sure, what Justice Barrett was saying in particular. And, again, more context. Remember that she, of course, was one of the justices who had recently joined the court to strike down Roe, right? And so this being one of the first cases in front of the Supreme Court since the SCOTUS kicked the question of abortion to the states, and now these really muddy, murky, gray area questions are coming their way. I totally agree. I was like, what did Barrett? What is she saying? Because on the surface, it's like, well, she's probably going to, be in favor of the Idaho argument. But there was one moment, did you hear when she said, I'm shocked. She said she mentioned when Turner was talking about, I think it was Justice Sotomayor was questioning him, and then Justice Barrett kind of added in with Justice Sotomayor saying, like, no, answer her question. And I'm actually kind of shocked because basically he was saying something that kind of undermined some filings, ahead of all of these court cases. Of course, there's a bunch of paperwork and all the filings and stuff that goes on, and that she was really pressing him on a couple of these points, and he kind of, it seemed to be reacting to that a little bit. And then she was like, no, you need to answer it, please. I thought that was fascinating. That back and forth, I wasn't necessarily expecting it either.
No. And I thought it was really interesting. One of the issues with the Idaho abortion bans is everything says like the doctor's medical discretion, the doctor's medical discretion if the patient is dying, that it is so subjective. And some of the justices pushed back on that and said, okay, so you're trusting doctors' medical discretion, but you also aren't. Like you can't have it both ways. If you trust their medical discretion that an abortion is the care that is needed, then either you trust them or you don't. You can't say, well, we trust them to make the decision if the patient's life is in danger, but we don't trust them to make that decision if their health or fertility is in danger. You can't have both, right? That doesn't make sense. Either you trust them in their medical judgment or you don't.
Yeah. I also thought, I'm sure you caught onto this too, the question of like, what is a hypothetical? And it was fascinating to hear, certainly the liberal justices in particular were bringing up, this isn't hypothetical. These are real world situations, talking about what is it, pre-prom, which is essentially a woman's water breaks really prematurely, and it could
Yeah,
lead to
preterm. Yeah.
preterm. So it could potentially lead to like sepsis, which of course is very dangerous, and other issues if an abortion isn't potentially performed. And then there was another, examples about preeclampsia, severe preeclampsia, which is a pretty common thing that
Oh,
happens for a
very
lot of
common.
people, right? Yeah, I thought that was fascinating to hear, very like it seemed like, not surprisingly, I suppose, that the women justices, including kind of Barrett to a degree, all were talking very real world about these very specific situations, and that the male justices didn't particularly like live in the world of women's bodies and what's happening to women's bodies, but was more, around the legal questions. But I thought it was fascinating that the female justices were doing both. Like they were both saying, well, okay, what in this case then? How does that square with EMTALA and what Idaho's abortion ban says?
Yeah, no, I think it speaks very much as to why we need women, female presenting people, people who can, who have uteruses and can have a pregnancy. We need them in these decision-making spheres, because I think that adds an element to how you examine this. I really was happy that the U.S. Solicitor General addressed a lot of the Idaho concerns or case head on.
Oh yeah, tell me more.
A lot of the positions that Josh Turner made and that Roa Labrador have made as a nurse are wild. But I thought it was perfect that she really addressed those head on. Like one of them is, are doctors being forced to perform abortions? That if EMTALA is allowed to again become the law of the land in Idaho,
sure,
would doctors be forced to perform abortions? And as someone who's worked in the ER, if a doctor has, any kind of a moral quandary about something, nobody's being forced to do something. There are other doctors who would, if they're like, I don't feel comfortable doing this procedure, someone else would step in. We would have patients all the time who'd be like, I specifically want a female doctor, or I want a male doctor. And we always accommodated that. Nobody is being forced to do something that they have a moral issue with or didn't want to do.
This idea of like the conscious objection question, right? So like, yeah, if you're a Catholic doctor and you feel morally like I can't perform an abortion, that Idaho does have protection for that EMTALA wouldn't supersede that, right?
Yeah. And that's already happening every day in the ER, where there were, if a patient has an issue, if a doctor has an issue, you have workarounds. You have things you can do. Nobody is being forced to do these things that has a moral objection to them. And I was so glad they also addressed mental health emergencies. And this is something that the Attorney General has talked about a lot, that, well, what if somebody's having a mental health crisis and they want to get an abortion? Are doctors just, willy-nilly giving abortions to people having a mental health crisis?
Right. Does EMTALA protect them in this case? Is this apply?
Yeah. Would that be, if EMTALA is in full effect, would that happen? And again, as someone who has worked in the ER, that is not a stabilizing treatment for a mental health crisis. If you're having a mental health issue and you are in the ER, the stabilizing treatment is to treat the mental health crisis. And then if afterwards, you would like to have an abortion, then that's something to talk about with your OBGYN, your general provider, your primary doctor. But that's not happening in the ER. The stabilizing treatment is let's use whatever medications we need, whatever treatments we need. Let's get you in a place where you are mentally feeling well. And then we can talk about what other health how did you get here? What needs to be done? But that's not happening in the ER because there's major issues with liability and consent.
Interesting.
Like if you're having a mental health crisis, how can you consent to that?
Yeah, have an abortion right then. Yeah.
And so I was so glad that she addressed that head on very clearly. Clearly, she spoke to medical professionals who can speak to that with authority. So I thought she did an excellent job. And I was so glad that she so clearly addressed those points because from a medical perspective, they are kind of nonsense, honestly.
For a second, it felt like a sidetrack to me. I was like, wait, why are we talking about mental health? But you're totally right, because that has been one of the main arguments that conservatives in Idaho have been making for a long time.
Yeah, it's been one of their main positions about why we can't have a health exception.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that on the public record now we have excellent testimony about why that's not a factor in the health issue part of this or wanting a health exception. That's not one of the issues. That's not a stabilizing treatment. That's not what is happening.
Yeah. Well, looking at it all, Lindsay, or like just, hearing the arguments, it kind of, for me, I was like, I don't know how this is going to come down, because at first, like I said, when the injunction was lifted in January, that seemed to be kind of a signal that maybe they're going to rule in Idaho's favor in the end, and perhaps they still will. But hearing Justice Barrett, Chief Justice Roberts, his questions were pointed at some points to Josh Turner and to the Idaho argument, and seemed like he was skeptical on some points, as well as Justice Kavanaugh. So those three conservative votes, I'm not sure where they're headed right now.
Yeah, I still think it really might end up 4-5.
Who do you think that swing vote is?
I think it might be Amy Coney Barrett. I think it might be one of those things where she can vote her conscience, because
sure,
it will still be a more conservative outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there was more pointed questioning and more thoughtful questioning than I anticipated. But it could also be not just the abortion aspect, but the fact that if there is a Supreme Court ruling that federal law is not supreme, that has pretty far-reaching implications.
Yeah.
And so that
the
is
preemption
also
question is huge.
That is a huge issue. And several justices addressed that if they rule with Idaho, like, what does that mean for all federal law and versus state law if there's ever a conflict? And that has such huge implications.
Yeah, beyond the abortion debate, beyond all of this, I absolutely agree. I mean, it sounded like what's next, as I understand it, is that a ruling could come in June, probably, which ironically is 2 years after the Dobbs decision, after Roe v. Wade fell. So I guess we'll keep watching this and seeing what actually ends up happening.
So I have a quick election PSA. Today, Friday, is the last day to register to vote if you want to vote early in the May primary. And you can register online or in person today. I would probably do it as early as you can if that's what you're looking to do when you vote.
Yeah, definitely do it today at some point. And again, this is for the primary election, which is coming up May 21st. And there's some info to also know about early voting, depending on how you want to vote. I mean, everybody's got their different How do you like to vote, Lindsay? Do you go the day of, or do you do you do early voting? What's your voting style?
Oh yeah, I'm early voting. My anxiety, I don't know. I'm like, something will happen that day. I'm going to miss it. So
right, yeah.
I like to have it done early. I'm in, I'm out. It's quick. And
know your ballots submitted. Yeah.
Yep. I know it's in. I know everything's good. How about you? How are you voting?
You know what? I like to go in person on the day of. I do like the feeling of being around people and participating in democracy in that live moment. But of course, yeah, it can be, depending on the line and stuff, you kind of need to just be aware of what your precincts usually like. But for those of you who are like Lindsay, early voting will run in Ada County and Canyon County, May 6th to the 17th. There's a bunch of locations, basically all the city halls in Ada County. So you can go to City Hall, Boise City Hall, Meridian, Eagle. And then there's also the mobile voting unit, which is like so cool. I think it was Ada County was one of the first places in the country to have these mobile voting units available. And they've become like kind of this really like a civic hit, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think they're fantastic. Bring the votes to the people.
Yeah, they'll be at libraries mostly. Yeah. So
yeah, I would say they're really accessible locations. And where can people find out exactly where those mobile voting?
Yeah, voteidaho.gov has a lot of big information, and then we'll link in the show notes to specifics on Ada County early voting and the mobile voting. And then in Canyon County, early voting will also be at the Hispanic Cultural Center and the Elks Lodge in Caldwell, May 6th to the 17th.
Well, and this primary is going to be really interesting because Ada County just launched their new ballot verifier tool. It went live on Wednesday, so
Yeah.
it will be available for this primary. And I actually think this is really, really interesting. Have you heard about this, Frankie?
I just was reading about it, and yeah, I feel like this is kind of big news. It seemed, according to what they're saying, it is kind of the first of its kind, maybe even in the country, to have this ballot verifier. So that's interesting too, kind of leading on a couple of fronts when it comes to like transparency and access in Ada County. Yeah, so it sounds as though, if I'm understanding correctly, it's going to be after the election, maybe up to 4 to 6 weeks later, that anyone, so any person, can go on this ballot verifier and look at real ballots. Now, the first thing that I thought was, wait, are there going to be names on there? Like, will you see the voter who cast for whoever specifically? And no, the names will be redacted apparently, but you'll be able to see, how many ballots were cast in favor of this candidate and actually look at the ballot. But I think it's the reason why it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks post-election is they have to physically scan all of the ballots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that it can be a digital tool, but it's with paper ballots. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much information that's going to be available here. I thought that was so interesting. Because previously they said you would have to get this kind of information, you would have to submit a public records request,
right,
and maybe pay a fee. But now everything's just going to be available online. So it's going to be incredibly accessible if you want information about what happened with the elections, all kinds of data you're going to have. You can look for information based on the candidate or the races or ballot questions. And then you can look up candidates from different races. So that obviously won't be available until we have, multiple elections. But you can look up, how did this candidate do in this election and kind of look at trends.
Yeah, that's
which I think
too
is really, really interesting. Something else that I thought was really, really unique is that you can look at voter habits just, as a citizen.
Sure.
So you can see, like, are people voting a straight ticket, or are there items that, maybe a voter voted all Republican except for these candidates or these issues, or all Democrat except for these candidates or these issues. So we're going to get to see a lot more about voter behavior in Ada County, which I think will be fascinating.
Yeah, I think it'll create a lot more transparency, which is certainly the point of all of this. And of course, it's the backdrop of the question of, election integrity and what that means, and how different groups, depending on your view on that, have used that to question results of elections. So Ada County is coming out and saying, hey, we're going to give everybody access to this information, which I don't know. I think it's a good thing. I think more information is always good. Let's have more sunshine on all of this, and maybe more people will be like citizen journalists looking into this stuff and getting really invested in it and curious.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is kind of born out of distrust and conspiracies.
Correct.
But I always like the motto of trust but verify.
Yeah.
So I am really interested. I think, like you said, us having more information isn't going to be a bad thing. Us having more transparency regarding voting isn't going to be a bad thing. So even though it's born out of this distrust that maybe I don't identify as much with, I am glad that we will have access to this information. And hopefully then that can be used, when people are talking about how they distrust the election process or what's going on. We have all of this information now. Like, oh, if you've got a concern, you've got an issue, we have all of this information to help address that. So I think this could be a really positive step forward to countering those discussions.
Yeah, agreed. The other kind of news that came out around elections and big questions of how Idaho wants to move forward with democracy is around the open primaries initiative, ballot initiative process. That's closing. They have until May 1st, right? So next week, next Wednesday, to gather all those signatures. And then we'll know, once all the signatures are gathered, and they can assess if they qualify to actually be on the 2024 ballot. Lindsay, can you just give us the quick snapshot of what this could do, open primaries, and what this ballot initiative asks voters?
Yeah. So currently, right now, there are closed primaries in this state. So if you are an unaffiliated voter, if you're, more of an independent voter, there are elections you're not able to vote in. And according to Open Primaries Initiative and Luke Mayville, that's approximately 275,000 registered voters who are currently unaffiliated or independent who can't vote in the primary elections. And so it restricts their ability to exercise their voting rights as an American, as an Idahoan. And so what this would do is make it so that the primaries are open. You don't have to be affiliated with a party to vote in the primary or in any election. You just have to be a registered voter. And so it really opens up that ability for you to vote your conscience and to, have access to all of the candidates on the ballot. So, if in one party you think one candidate is better and in another party you think another candidate is better, you can vote for lots of different people. It's supposed to also help with, not having as extremist of candidates win. And that's something that they've made the case for, that especially where we live in a state with a super majority party and these closed primaries, that is an environment where more extremist candidates thrive.
Right, because essentially the primary is the election in Idaho. Yeah. De facto, that's kind of how it's worked, certainly for Republicans at least.
Yeah. And so you have these candidates that then a lot of people in the state don't necessarily feel like represent them or represent Idaho values or how we feel as a state. According to Luke Mayville, they need to get 63,000 verified signatures. And they, on May 1st, of course, they're going to submit the last of the signatures. But according to Mayville, they've already had over 40,000 signatures verified. So, it sounds like with this last push, that might be what they need to really ensure that they're able to get over that hurdle. All right, Frankie, it was a very news-heavy week. Lots of things happening with elections and laws and Supreme Court. Do you have any top picks this week?
I do. 2 words: dumpster fires.
Oh, whoa!
Literal dumpster fires. Have you seen these stories about how dumpsters are catching on fire in our community?
No, what is going on?
Yeah. So it's like spontaneous combustion, but really what's happening is that people are throwing away their, e-cigarettes, kids' toys, hearing aids, all kinds of, everyday household things and things that we all have that have lithium ion batteries in them. And those are very dangerous and they can catch fire. And when they're in a dumpster, smashed in with a bunch of paper and all kinds of other very flammable things, the whole dumpster can catch on fire. So there was one, apparently, that this happened actually in Meridian on Wednesday. Boise Dev reported about this, that there was a dumpster fire. And then in Boise, the Idaho Statesman had a great article about how these have become more common and that Republic Services, the folks who are picking up the trash, they're like having to be trained. The drivers are having to be trained on what happens if a fire begins and like when to eject the stuff in the dumpster once and where they can safely do it.
Fire suppression methods.
Essentially, like not only are they, it's a very complex job. I can only imagine running one of these trucks. Now you have to also know like where's a safe parking lot to dump all the flammable things that are on fire in our dumpster truck right now. So
yeah, no, that adds a different dimension to your job. If it's like, here's your job. Also, it all might catch on fire and it's your job to make sure and manage that.
Yes,
that definitely adds,
it really does
an extreme level of concern to that job.
Yeah, I think we're not thinking of how complex that job could be given this new situation. So kind of the solution here,
and then add fire
to it all. Yeah, a firefighter as well as trash and driver and pickup person, all of it. So yeah, I think also I really love the Idaho Statesman kind of put this in the context of, well, what should we do with all of these devices? Like, what do you do when you have things with lithium ion batteries in them? And where the hell should we take them if we can't throw them in the trash? There are hazardous waste pickups that are designated around the Treasure Valley, and that's where you should take them. So don't put them in the trash. If you're questioning it, maybe use one of these sites just in case. And also maybe repair the thing instead of throwing away at all. If it can be fixed, look into fixing it. And there's these really great repair cafes. Have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah, so there's these repair cafes. The city of Boise has been partnering with Jump primarily on these, I believe. So these different events that have gone on for a couple years now where you can bring your broken radio, and instead of throwing it away or, give it to a thrift store when it can't work anyway, you go to this repair cafe, and like just citizens who are really smart and good at fixing things are there to help you figure out if it can be fixed.
Oh, that's really cool.
It's so cool. I think it's one of the best ways for our community to come together around stuff like how to not fill up our landfill too much and also not let dumpsters catch on fire. So
I think those are great goals. Great, limiting both our waste and spontaneous fires in our dumpsters.
Yep, literal dumpster fires. So yeah, that caught my eye this week. What about you? What's your pick for the week?
My pick for the week is that ISAT and iReady testing is almost over.
Oh, okay.
This is the bane of parent existence and children. Children are the ones taking the test.
Sure.
But it is just so hard on them.
Oh, wow.
They come home so tired and a little crabby, and like you can always tell it's ISAT iReady testing because I have to go find my kids and wake them up for dinner because they just crash. They're so tired.
How long does it go for?
2 weeks.
Wow.
And it's not all on the same day. So different schools do it at different times, different grades do it at different times, just to really spread out the pain for everyone. So it's a different kid every day that is doing this. Anyway, it's just so hard. I try to really, lighten the chores and everything so they can kind of relax because it's just so stressful for everyone. But when it's all done, then, and everybody's done, and we have one kid who has one more next week.
Okay.
But once it's finished, we do dessert for dinner.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah. Each kid gets to pick their own dessert that they want. And we have just a buffet of desserts for dinner because it's so stressful and we're so glad it's done.
Oh my God. That's brilliant. Good job, Mom. Good job, Lindsay.
I don't know if it's good parenting, but it's fun parenting.
I think it's fabulous. I would have loved that. Oh man. Yeah. Okay. Feeling it for all of those students out there and the parents that are helping them get through it. So that's great.
Yes. I was going to say dessert to get us into the weekend.
Yes.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show is produced by Evelyn Avitia, Frankie Barnhill, and me, Lindsay Van Allen. Blake Hunter and Adrian Gonzalez wrote our Hey Boise newsletter this week, and our music is by Up Is The Down Is The. If you enjoyed our show today, tell your friends about us. We'll be back Monday with another interesting story from around the Treasure Valley. You won't want to miss it.